Hello and welcome back to Serious Social. I'm here with Katie today and we're going to be talking about how brands can sort of turn social trends to their advantage. So Katie, we've just seen the end of Love Island, one of the nation's favourite TV shows of the year, and things are coming up towards the Bake Off, which the nation also loves very much. And last year there was nearly 1 million tweets or conversations around the Bake Off. It's incredibly popular for conversation, and I'm sure it can be very tempting for brands to jump onto that conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the advantages is you get all that awareness because you're part of the show conversation, and also it gives you an opportunity to target new audiences. But it's a bit of a challenge because you can be in danger of shoehorning your brand into a conversation you have no right to be part of. And the danger is not only will it fall on deaf ears, but it will also mean that you could face a backlash. I mean, you can imagine everybody's talking about making cakes.
Yum.
And you come in, yeah, exactly. You come in and go, well, I'm a bank, let me talk about insurance and interest rates. You know, so you have to make sure there's a fit.
Of course.
And that means you need to find the hook that gives you the right to have the conversation. Doesn't mean you just have to be a baking brand or a product that fits in with baking. You can actually be kind of quite different, but it's finding the right fit. And how do you find that right fit?
Right. And I think, like we mentioned with Love Island, there was a lot of brands using that conversation as part of their kind of marketing and their social media conversations. So how can brands make sure that they're empathetic to the conversation when they're not a direct sponsor of the show?
That's a really good question, because obviously sponsorship brings with it lots of benefits, particularly that you know what's coming up.
Right.
But we looked at the data from last year, and actually the most dominant two brands were Innocent Drinks and KitchenAid.
Okay, right.
And neither of those are sponsors, but on social they did extraordinarily well. They both used two different techniques. But what's very clear when you look at the brands that do well when they sort of jump on the bandwagon of a show is that they've done their planning. They've looked at what audiences like. They've understood the kind of flavour of that audience, their tone of voice, what they're interested in, the kind of speed and rationale of those conversations, how they uptick during the show. The danger is that you fall into a pattern where all you're focused on is real time. And the reason why that's a danger is it can be you need deep pockets. You need deep pockets if you're going to think about it. So you need an analyst, you need a copywriter, you need a creative, a designer with you to work real time during the show. And actually the moments for a brand to talk during the show are actually quite limited. What's interesting when you look at that data again, you see that the conversation, particularly about Bake Off, tends to happen all week, whether or not it's people then doing Bake Off at work or for a charity, but actually people just talk about baking quite a lot. And we see an uptick in general conversations about baking around GBBO that then continues all the way through to Christmas. It's quite interesting.
What's quite phenomenal is it almost becomes part of, you know, this GBBO season becomes a lifestyle rather than just a social conversation.
Yes.
It's so much more than just a few tweets and a hashtag during the show once a week. Like you say, it goes throughout the week.
You are spot on, because actually what we see with Bake Off is a greater community. So there is you can see people are tweeting the whole way through the show. They're not just doing the one-off tweet. It's quite an interesting angle. And what we see that people tweet on average 3 times. You don't see that, for instance, in Love Island. It tends to be one-off, very sporadic. And they maintain it. There's no drop-off during the show period. They also, they love to retweet. They retweet almost as much as they create original posts, which again is that sort of sharing community feel that continues on. And that's the sort of the moment, the angle that most brands that are now looking at this should be considering. They love emojis. Do you know, it's interesting, nearly every show except for BBC Question Time loves an emoji. And this one is unsurprising cakes, and I always call it the crying emoji, but I think it's laughing.
The laughing
with crying emoji. But on Last Minute, not on Last Minute, on Love Island, what was really interesting is that the emojis were more hearts and broken hearts. So
Right.
you begin to understand the slight differences, and the tiny microscopic differences that mean that your tone and language changes. But you can also look at other topics. So not only does this community talk about baking, they also have what we'd call affinity topics. In other words, they also tweet or post
Right.
on Facebook about other topics. And those other topics tend to, this particular Bake Off community talks about sports, family, parenting, and pets. So now you can see how brands that maybe sit outside the baking categories can actually fit in. And that, I think that gives you greater opportunity to look for the angles that will fit your brand and give you the right to have that conversation.
Right. Okay, great. And obviously you've been doing a lot of research around this, and you've revealed a little bit already of what you've uncovered, but what else have been the kind of key findings? What have you found really interesting about looking at these conversations on social?
I think the interesting thing is that you can look beyond the show itself. So look beyond the 8 p.m. on a Tuesday when Bake Off happens, and that you can extend that. So you're able to look at how the conversation flexes around ingredients, talking about whether or not you've got an icing bag. In fact, last year, one of the big things was cake stands.
Right, okay, relevant.
So that was the biggest topic. When it came to products, people wanted to buy cake stands.
Right.
Because of course the showstopper is nearly always put on a cake stand. It's the sort of thing where you go.
I'm sure it's probably part of the whole Instagram culture as well. You've made a cake and you want to put it on your social feed.
Absolutely. So, and we've made the report. We've pulled the report together. We basically looked at all the data from last year to look at where there are soft insights that would actually carry through to this year, regardless of who was actually who the contestants are, because of course they'll be different, and also regardless of what topics are covered, because for instance last year very little was covered on vegan food, for instance, and there's rumours that there's going to be a vegan challenge coming up, but only rumours this year. But you can use that as a base level to ensure that you have the right to have that conversation, and we've made the report free to download off our website, so anybody who's interested in grabbing the opportunity of Bake Off can go and have a look and see whether or not there are angles and ideas that they can then take forward into campaigns.
Yeah, excellent. And I think one thing that brands could end up being a little bit concerned about is with these enormous conversations, like we said last year, there was nearly 1 million tweets about GBBO. How can they cut through the noise? I mean, if they're all talking about the same kind of thing, what can they do, or how can they kind of angle themselves to cut through the conversation and actually make a difference?
That's an interesting question, because actually when you look at most of the posts that are being put out, they don't carry a lot of imagery. So straight away what you need to do is think about what visuals you use, and we call it thumb-stopping content. Part of the reason for it is that when Bake Off conversations get going, particularly during the show, they move at pace through the feeds, and that's when you want content that will actually make someone stop and have a look at it. So we want to look at thumb-stopping content, which generally means good visuals, moving images, so video, but also GIFs, or even just a little bit of sparkle on your imagery, not something to catch the eye, so that people actually look at your post. And then there's the other element to it, which is finding a bit of personality, a tone of voice that not only fits with Bake Off and your brand, but is able to get punched through it. And that is where Innocent won. Absolutely. They were the leading brand in terms of mentions last year. And bearing in mind they're not a show sponsor, they led with humour and innocent sass. I can't think where they
all know what that is.
Yeah, just cheekiness, basically. And what's interesting is they led because they were retweets, being retweeted so much because it was funny, and then continuously being retweeted, so that the retweets were being retweeted.
Yeah.
The second thing that's really interesting is that often in social media, running competitions is considered quite a lazy sort of, let's run a competition, blah. But actually, in the Bake Off community, they love a competition, and they'll join in with lots of different competitions. So it's definitely an element you want to integrate into the way you do it. KitchenAid used it, and that was their tactic to get more mentions, and they did it brilliantly, because not only did they run competitions throughout the whole programme series, but they also used really strong visuals and used high-end prizes.
Right.
And I think that definitely raised the game a little bit, rather than you can win an icing bag. You know, it was proper stuff that you could get. The third then is paid. You're going to have to use paid in order to get the right kind of targeting, reach the people you really want to reach, not just everyone. And that when it gets to targeting, it's very tempting to look at just going on the hashtag. But the challenge with that is that the bid prices get high and you need pretty deep pockets to it can drain your budget pretty fast. So be smart about it. One of the things we discovered again in the research was that most of the tweets came from cities, and not all cities. So what you had is very concentrated to places like Manchester and Liverpool and London. So you could geo-target, which would then allow you to filter against the hashtags or filter against Bake Off on terms to actually bring your pools of audience data down to a reasonable size, which means that your paid budget will last longer.
Excellent. So I think in summary, the main thing is just make sure that the brand actually has a place to be involved in the conversation. Make sure that it's relevant, and it's not always about the obvious, the obvious things. There are ways of making it relevant and tailoring it to what you want to say. So we hope you've really enjoyed that Serious Social, and we very much have as well. If you'd like to look at the whole report, it's available on our website, and if you'd like to watch any more of our Serious Socials, follow the Serious Social hashtag.
They run away with a cake.
I was
Bring the cake back.
I was like, I couldn't get my words out because I was like, do I get a cake? Do I?
Bring the cake back. Have a cake.
That was the bad.